let me ask you the cliche question. I can understand that space time is doomed, and that there are these deeper structures, amplitude or whatever other complex topological structure we may find. Um, but why do you go toward consciousness? Why do you see the link between consciousness?
Partly it's just poverty of my imagination. Um, so it's I have this. We all have the feeling that we have experiences like headaches or smell of garlic, taste of chocolate, sound of a trumpet, um, and we've most of us who are scientists have thought, well, so we need to understand how, for example, a neural activity causes those experiences. And that's the framework in which I was brought up. And all of my colleagues are working in that framework. So somehow we have to figure out the physical basis and perhaps the neural basis in the human case of our conscious experiences. Well, now space time is not fundamental. So okay, so I'm not going to be booting up my conscious experiences from space time, and I'm not going to be doing it from amplitude. There's not enough. There's not enough there yet. So my attitude is, and the other motivation is this: it's what I call the stipulation problem of consciousness. My friends and colleagues, and again, these are good friends and colleagues. So there's nothing personal here. They're brilliant, and they're doing great work, and I hope they continue. Um, but their theories, like the integrated information theory or global workspace theory or orchestrated collapse of quantum states of microtubules theory, they they stipulate that space and time are fundamental. Even IIT, it's a functionalist theory, but all of the instantiations are in space-time. So they stipulate that space-time is fundamental. And if they have some other instantiation, I'd like to hear about it. Right, but so they stipulate that. Then they stipulate these functional properties, like the integrated information theory, or the global workspace theory, or the orchestrated collapse. So they have to stipulate, in addition to the physics of space-time and so forth, they stipulate these more functional things, and then they have to stipulate the conscious experiences, because I've asked Giulio Tononi back in late 1990s, and again just a couple years ago, is there any specific conscious experience that you can give me the particular pattern of integrated information that must be that conscious experience, like the taste of chocolate? What is the integrated information pattern that must be the taste of chocolate? It could not be the smell of garlic or whatever. Can you give me even one conscious one? I mean, this is supposed to be a theory of conscious experiences. So what specific conscious experience can you explain without hand wave? None. How about global workspace? None. Orchestrated collapse of microtubules? None. So every conscious experience is also stipulated. So we have some neural correlates, right? So area V4 of visual cortex is correlated with color experience. So if we're going to say, here's this pattern of integrated information in area V4, then you have to stipulate that that's the color red. I mean, because it's not a theorem from your theory. So you're stipulating space-time and its properties. You're stipulating your own functional properties like integrated information, and then you're stipulating the conscious experiences. So my attitude was, Occam's razor says stipulate as little as possible. Everybody's stipulating space-time and their algorithms and conscious experiences. How about I just stipulate conscious experiences? I'll just start with conscious experiences. That means I have some hard work to do, because I don't get to stipulate space-time. They stipulate it. I don't have the pleasure of stipulating it. I have to derive it. So I have to show how space-time would arise from a dynamical sequence of dynamics of conscious agent. And I can't stipulate integrated information. I have to show how, if integrated information turns out to be of value, I'll have to show from a dynamics of consciousness why you would get integrated information. So I can't just stipulate that. So the idea is to stipulate as little as possible. And I started off by saying it's the poverty of my imagination. If space-time isn't fundamental, in some sense, the only other thing around for me to think about is our conscious experiences. One could go deeper and say awareness, pure awareness without any particular content. So one can go there, and that's as far as Hoffman has gone so far. Now, I'm not saying that that's the final road. That just shows, how shallow Hoffman's thinking is. But that's as far as I've gotten. And I would love to have someone say, yeah, well, behind conscious experiences and behind pure awareness without any experience at whatever, there is something, being, but and we or whatever it might be, that's even more fundamental. So I'm open to that. But my attitude is, conscious experiences are a good next baby step. If we let go of space time, we, maybe conscious experiences won't be the final word, but it seems like it's a natural next step. And maybe if we do our work there and get a mathematically precise theory, that theory will then tell us why we need to go beyond conscious experiences. Just like Einstein's theories and quantum theory told us why we had to go beyond space-time, right? These theories that assume space-time then tell us the edge of it. So my attitude is, let's do theories of consciousness, because that seems like it's within our grasp. We can do it. And if we do it right, then our theory itself may help us to see the next step that we needed to take beyond conscious experiences.
Right, and they might be helpful for solving the hard problem, right? Like that. I mean, all these theories are brilliant, and I'm not smart enough to understand all of them, but um, they just don't solve the hard problem yet. I mean, even orchestrated collapse, microtubules, which has important implications for quantum gravity, doesn't definitively solve the hard problem.
Well, yeah, in fact, it can't deal with any one specific conscious experience. There's so it's a theory of conscious experiences that can't explain even one conscious experience. I mean, if I had a theory of physics that couldn't explain even one dynamical system of physics, I would say, well, I think that's not really a theory of physics. You call it a theory of physics, but if a theory of conscious experiences that can't explain one conscious experience, I don't know why it's called a theory of conscious experience. So and again, these are my friends and colleagues, and I'll be hard nosed at conferences, and we'll go have a beer and be friendly and chat about this stuff afterwards. But when we're doing the science, I mean, I have to put it to them and say, look, there's no beef here. There's no specific conscious experience that can be explained, and so and that's true for all these physical theories. And I think the physicists are telling us why. The physicists are saying you'll never get it because space-time isn't fundamental. If you start with something inside space-time, you're starting with the wrong foundation. That's not what's fundamental.
Right. And I mean, moving on to your conscious actor model, yeah, I think it's very interesting because A, it is falsifiable principally, and B, it's not a dualist theory. Yeah, the world is entailed within the model. It's totally monist, totally naturalist theory.
Exactly right. I agree with you on both points. It's monist, so there's only conscious agents. It's conscious agents all the way down, and it's not dualist. I'm not saying that this there so and it's not panpsychist. So like panpsychists will say space-time is fundamental, and the particles that physicists have found, like the bosons, leptons, and quarks, those are the fundamental particles. And what's the fundamental nature of those particles, though, is not physical; it's consciousness. So, so it's a kind. They might not call it dualism. They'll say panpsychism. But they're shoehorning consciousness into a space-time structure. The physicists are telling us is not fundamental. So we're shoehorning our theory of consciousness into a discarded physics model. Why would we want to jump into something that the physicists have discarded, and not just discarded, but found something deeper, like the amplitude heater? So panpsychism is using a discarded model and trying to shoehorn consciousness into the structure of a model that we now know is actually a very poor data structure and a very shallow data structure. So that's not a promising way to go for a fundamental theory of consciousness. So it's not dualist, it's not panpsychist, it is monist, and it's mathematically precise. And what we're doing right now, we're about to submit a paper for publication probably next month or at the end of this month. what we've done is we've taken the theory of conscious agents and said, okay, the physicists have told us that the deepest structure they found beyond space-time are these things called decorated permutations. So if we want to boot up space-time from consciousness, we need to show how our theory gives rise to decorated permutations. Because if we can do that, the physicists show us how to go from decorated permutations to scattering amplitudes in space-time. So they've done a lot of heavy lifting for us, right? All we need to do, so they gave us a little interface. Here's the interface, decorated permutations. If we can get it, take a theory of consciousness and get it to project into decorated permutations, then they say, okay, well, here's how you build an amplitude from it, and the volume of the amplitude gives you the scattering amplitude. So we can just now study what the physicists have done and use that to go all the way to space-time. So a few weeks ago, we did that. Our dynamics is Markovian. It's the Markovian dynamics of conscious agents. So at one point, I said, well, okay, they want decorated permutations. So surely someone has shown how to assign decorated permutations to Markov chains. So I went and looked, did a search. I couldn't find anything. Maybe someone else will find it, but I couldn't find anything. And I looked at the best players. A brilliant mathematics professor, Lauren Williams at Harvard, who's been working, she knows decorated permutations and is working also in Markov chains. So I really looked at her work to see if she had actually done a mapping from an arbitrary Markov kernel, Markov chain to decorated. And I didn't see it. Maybe she's done it and I didn't find it. But so we decided, okay, we need some new math here. It looks like, what is a mapping from Markov chains to decorated permutations? And that's in our paper. We discovered it's a beautiful mapping. It's completely clean, and we can actually show the relationship of our mapping to the mapping between positive Grassmannians and decorated permutations. So we can show. So that's what this paper is doing, is saying we have a theory of consciousness, qua consciousness, not as emergent from space-time or neurons. It's outside of space-time. Just the theory of Markovian dynamics. We have a canonical way of mapping that into decorated permutations, and therefore we get to use all the good work of the physicists to go from decorated permutations to the amplituhedron into scattering amplitudes. So now I just have to read that literature and understand how their part of the story goes. So that's what I'm doing right now. But we've got the map into decorated permutations, and so I'm pretty excited because maybe the physicists will be interested too. It seems like the physicists, maybe they couldn't care less about consciousness. Who knows? But they might care about a dynamical system behind the amplituhedron. That might be of interest to them. So there's just this static structure called the amplituhedron is just sitting there, and there's decorated permutations behind it. But they might, and I would imagine some of them would be very interested in saying, well, is there any dynamical interpretation that we could give that's even deeper than the amplituhedron? Well, here's one offer. I'm not saying it's the only thing that we'll find, but here's an idea that's pretty natural. Once, frankly, this mapping to decorated permutations is work that is collaborative between Chetan Prakash and I, and it didn't take that long. It's once you think about it, it's not that hard. So it's pretty fun.
Sometimes I think the problem is just sort of a conceptual thing where a lot of people, a lot of physicists don't think consciousness is what we're talking about here, right? Like people think of consciousness as this macroscopic property that can only be applicable at a certain level of complexity, but that's not what's meant here. It's a far deeper problem.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's a really important point. So take integrated information theory, for example, right? They might, I just made the point that they can't explain any specific conscious experience, like taste of chocolate and so forth, but they can come back and say, but look, what we can do is we can use integrated information theory to tell whether a system is conscious or not. So we can't say what kind of consciousness they might have, but it's really a valuable contribution that we can say that this system has the right kind of integrated information complexity to be conscious or not, and we might be able to use that to help patients that are in locked in syndrome and decide whether or not they're locked in syndrome or whether they're really gone, for example, and decide whether you help to pull the plug. But I think that even they're not getting what they think. So they're arguing that they're still thinking about consciousness as an emergent property. Once you get a non-conscious system that has the right complexity of functional organization or causal organization in their case, then consciousness somehow emerges from that. Now, but space-time isn't fundamental. Objects in space-time and the complexity of objects in space-time are not fundamental. They're just a data structure. So right now, for example, we're talking via Zoom, and there's pixels on the screen, and some pixels on the screen. So I see behind you, I see a desk, a bookshelf with books and so forth, and they're not moving very much and so forth. And so I could use my little algorithm, Hoffman's integrated information theory of pixels, and say, well, no, the books are probably not animate, but if I look at your face pixels, I mean, there's face, the eyes are moving, the face is moving, you're nodding and you're smiling and so forth. So I could come up with my own complexity measure and say, aha, and I might say these pixels are conscious. The pixels for Ashar's face are conscious, but the book pixels are not. Well, pixels are pixels. And to say that pixels are conscious or not is just a mistake. It's a category error. Some pixels are providing a useful portal into your consciousness, right? I mean, the pixels that give me an image of your face, and your face is giving me some access to, if you think I'm full of it, or if you like what I'm saying, or whatever it might be. So I'm getting some access to your consciousness. So integrated information theory is essentially a theory of the pixels being conscious, and the pixels aren't conscious. And that's really important, because that means that in a medical situation, getting an integrated information score that says consciousness only means that it's showing that we have access to the consciousness. It's not showing that whether or not there is consciousness, right? Those are two very, very different things. It's whether the pixel dynamics is complex enough for me to understand Ashar's consciousness or not. But that's independent of whether Ashar is conscious or not. If the pixels aren't doing it, that doesn't mean Ashar isn't conscious. It just means the pixels aren't up to it. So it's quite possible that we could pull the plug on someone because they didn't have the right integrated information theory. And they could be fully conscious, because we're not getting a measure of consciousness qua consciousness. We're getting a measure of how well our interface lets us get access to the consciousness that's already there. So that's why this is not just abstract stuff. This cuts into hospital settings and whether we want to pull the plug. If I'm right, if this and integrated information theory is effectively just a theory of the pixels of a space-time, entities inside space-time, which is just a data structure, it's only measuring our access to the conscious, how much we can see of the conscious. It's not measuring the exact reality of the consciousness, only our access to it. That distinction makes all the difference in the world as to whether you want to use it in a medical setting to decide life and death.
That's such an important point. That's such an important point. That there is this implicit assumption out there that, well, when you get to the lower levels, we're right to be confused because the dynamics aren't worked out, and there are these complex, exotic mathematics that we don't know of. But when we scale high enough into complexity, we can be confident to use our methods and make claims about medicine or psychology or economics. But that's not the case. Scaling doesn't get rid of the problem.
That's right. And as long as we understand that we're, like with neuroscience, that we're dealing with the user interface, so that the neurons that we see are the neurons that we render when we look. And then we understand that there's a much more complicated reality behind the neurons, or behind our biology. If we understand that, we can use the neurons. And I've collaborated and worked on MRI, fMRI, and EEG studies. I'm all for neuroscience. I mean, I think we need more work in neuroscience and so forth, not less. Um, but we have to be very, very careful and realize that we can't just take those things at face value. We really have to go much, much more deeply on them. So yeah.